Hello, and welcome back to Architecture Topics. I'm your host, Liam Karen, and today we're going back to Hong Kong in the early 1980s to talk about the HSBC headquarters, or HSBC main building, as it is also known. This might not be a building everyone recognizes immediately, like the Eiffel Tower or the Sydney Opera, but it was hugely influential in more ways than one. Let me explain. A few years ago, I had the chance to meet Norman Foster at a round table moderated by his wife, Helena Ochoa. During the Q&A, I asked him about a subject that fascinates me, architecture competitions. His answer was interesting enough to fill its own episode, but what stuck with me was Elena's comment. She reminded Foster that the right competition can change an architect's life, and that he might never have become the Norman Foster we know today if he hadn't won the competition for the HSBC building. So this project is key, both in the history of skyscraper design and in the career of one of the most prolific and influential architects of our time. Now, enough with the anecdotes. Let's dive into today's episode. In the late 1970s, Hong Kong's economy was booming, driven by finance and trade. Yet politically, its future was clouded. Back in 1898, Britain signed a 99-year agreement with China to control the territory. That lease was set to expire in 1997, and without it, the future of Hong Kong was uncertain. It was a place of both anxiety and extraordinary confidence, where uncertainty and prosperity existed side by side. And at the heart of this story stood HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. Founded in 1865, this wasn't just a bank, it was the Bank of Hong Kong. HSBC issued its own banknotes, funded the city's growth, and in many ways acted like a parallel government. To Hong Kong's people, it symbolized financial strength and continuity in a turbulent time. But by the late 1970s, the bank's headquarters on Queens Road Central was no longer enough. And the board wanted more than a bigger office. They wanted a landmark, a statement to reassure the city and show their strength to the rest of the world. Their chairman, Michael Sandberg, summed up the ambition in a single line: build the best bank building in the world. So in 1979, HSBC launched an international competition. Some of the biggest firms of the day were invited to submit proposals. Among them was Norman Foster, still early in his global career, working with the engineers of Ova Arup. His design broke every convention of the office tower, turning the skyscraper inside out and upside down. The jury quickly recognized the power of his vision, and Foster won the commission. And with it came the chance to completely rethink what a bank could be. What made Foster's proposal so unusual was that it flipped the office tower on its head, and it did so in more ways than one. See, most skyscrapers follow the same recipe, made from a heavy central core, stuffed with elevators and services, wrapped in a skin of offices, and supported by columns rising from the ground. Foster decided to scrap that model entirely. First, he pushed the core functions, such as elevators, staircases, and service shafts, to the outer edges. This freed up the entire interior to become a series of wide, column-free floors, open and flexible in ways office towers rarely were. In effect, the skyscraper was turned inside out, wearing its structure and services proudly on the surface instead of hiding them deep in a central core. Then came the upside-down part. Instead of stacking floors one on top of the other, supported by pillars, Foster suspended them. Giant steel trusses, aka giant triangular frameworks that act like super strong beams, span across the top of each structural bay, and from these trusses hang the floors below, held by massive steel rods. In essence, the weight of the floors is carried from above, like a bridge in the sky. From the outside, the building reads as three-step towers framed by pairs of steel masts. From the inside, it feels like a cathedral of technology, with structure and services exposed, celebrated, and made part of the architecture itself. It was radical, it was risky, and it promised HSBC not just an office, but a global statement. The design was bold enough on paper. However, building it in the crowded heart of Hong Kong presented an entirely different challenge. Construction began in 1981, and from the very start, the project was treated less like a traditional building and more like assembling an enormous machine. Instead of pouring concrete and building upwards step by step, Foster and Arup embraced prefabrication. Huge steel modules were fabricated in the shipyards of Glasgow, shipped halfway across the world, and bolted into place like pieces of a giant kit. Service pods, fully equipped units with bathrooms, stairwells, and mechanical systems, came from Japan, while other parts arrived from the United States and across Europe. By the time the building was finished, it had drawn on a supply chain that spanned 3 continents. Altogether, more than 27,000 tons of structural steel went into the frame. The precision was remarkable. Components arrived on site, slotted into place, and the skyscraper grew almost like a piece of engineering equipment rather than a conventional office tower. It took 5 years to put it all together. And when the building opened in 1985 and was officially inaugurated in 1986, it carried the title of the most expensive building ever constructed. The cost was staggering, about 5.2 billion Hong Kong dollars or 670 million US dollars at the time. That price tag shocked some, but it also made headlines, which was exactly what HSBC wanted. The bank had built a skyscraper that was not only technically radical, but symbolically extravagant, a global statement of wealth, confidence, and permanence. But for all its engineering innovation, the HSBC building wasn't just about technology. It was also about how a bank could meet the city. The whole structure was lifted up on steel legs, leaving the ground floor open as a public plaza. In the dense streets of central Hong Kong, where every square meter is usually sold or rented, this was a generous gesture. On weekdays, the space works like a shaded porch for the neighborhood. And on weekends, it becomes something more unexpected. A gathering place for domestic workers who use it as a picnic ground and social hub. In a city where open space is scarce, the HSBC Plaza has become part of Hong Kong's weekly rhythm. Guarding the steps into this plaza are 2 bronze lions, Stephen and Stitt. They had stood outside the bank's earlier headquarters since the 1930s, carried the scars of wartime, and were restored to their posts when the new tower opened. For Hong Kongers, they're more than decoration. People rub their paws for good luck, and their faces even appear on HSBC banknotes. The lions remind everyone that while the new building was daringly futuristic, it was also tied to the city's history and traditions. From this plaza, a set of dramatic escalators pulls you upward into the heart of the building. At the time, they were among the longest freestanding escalators in the world. Rising diagonally through the transparent belly of the tower, they make the act of entering the bank into a kind of theater. At the top of those escalators, you arrive to a 10-story atrium. Welcome to the banking hall, a space flooded with daylight and open to views of the city that feels less like a private office lobby and more like a civic hall. Foster himself called it a shop window for banking, an attempt to make finance visible and approachable rather than hidden behind walls and corridors. It was a radical way of saying that the bank's strength wasn't just in vaults and ledgers, but also in its presence as part of the city's public life. In the 80s, the HSBC building wasn't just innovative in structure. It was full of experimental ideas about light, technology, and even cultural symbolism. High above the atrium sat one of its most unusual features, the sun scoop. This was a mirrored device that tracked the sun and bounced daylight down through the 10-story void, carrying natural light deep into the heart of the bank and even into the public plaza below. It looked like a piece of science fiction, but it worked, reducing the need for artificial lighting and turning sunlight into part of the building's theater. The floors themselves were forward-looking too. Instead of pouring concrete slabs, Foster used raised panels, or what is now sometimes referred to as a technical floor. Cables and ducts ran underneath, which meant the offices could be reconfigured, technology could be updated, and the building could adapt without major renovation. In the 1980s, that kind of flexibility was rare. But not every innovation was about engineering. In Hong Kong, no major building can ignore feng shui, and HSBC's board made sure Foster took it seriously. The open atrium was praised for allowing positive energy, or qi, to flow through. The escalators cut diagonally, disrupting any straight-line path for bad spirits. And crucially, the orientation preserved views of Victoria Harbour, since water is seen as a symbol of prosperity. Over time, urban legends grew and added even more feng shui to the building. One of the most famous says that the rooftop structures were like cannons aimed at the Bank of China Tower, designed by I.M. Pei, whose sharp angles were believed to bring negative energy. But the truth is, HSBC was completed 5 years earlier, so the story can't be literal. Yet it shows how people in Hong Kong interpret buildings through the lens of feng shui, turning architecture into a kind of cultural conversation. In the end, the HSBC headquarters wasn't just a piece of high-tech engineering. It was also a cultural object, blending global modernism with local traditions and making both part of its identity. When the building was inaugurated, it was received as both shocking and exhilarating. To some, it was far too expensive, a monument to corporate extravagance. To others, it was thrilling proof that Hong Kong could host one of the most technologically advanced buildings in the world. For Norman Foster, it was a turning point. Winning the HSBC commission lifted him from a promising British architect to an international star. It proved that his high-tech experiments could succeed at the very largest scale, and it set the stage for some of his later works. For Hong Kong, the building became part of the skyline, but also part of daily life. Few skyscrapers of the 1980s managed that blend of spectacle and accessibility. Today, the HSBC main building is seen as a milestone in both architecture and engineering. It reshaped how an office tower could be built, how it could connect to a city, and how it could embody both global ambition and local tradition. When I think back to that round table with Norman Foster and Elena Ochoa, her comment stays with me. The right competition can change an architect's life. And in the case of the HSBC main building, it might have changed Foster's life, but it also changed the story of skyscrapers. And that's it for today's episode of Architecture Topics. If you enjoyed this story and don't want to miss the next one, you know what to do. Go follow the podcast and turn your notifications on. I'm Liam Karen, and I'll see you next time. Until then, keep looking up.